You are listening to Transresistor Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Franz. The website is theageoftransitions.com. I hope you check it out. Listen to past episodes of Transresistor Radio and see the other material on the site. Today on Transresistor Radio, we have two very special guests. I'm excited to welcome to the program Rebecca and Roman from SpectralIntelligenceSolutions.com. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
Yes. I'd like to start the show just by asking the two of you what you do at SpectralIntelligenceSolutions.com.
Our website is a resource for people who are dealing with paranormal problems, whether they be, ghosts or demonic entities. And we also educate people in, how to avoid having issues with those things, how to stop issues with those things. And in addition to that, we do actually go out in the field and go through people's homes and remove any items that may be causing the problems to be there, as well as help cleanse out the houses from any kind of demonic or spiritual influence that's negative that they may want to get out of their houses.
Yes. Now, this is a very interesting subject, and it's interesting just coming across you and your websites. I came across, Rebecca, your work because you are, additionally to doing your work at SpectralIntelligenceSolutions.com, you also have a comic book called Perdition, and the website is perditioncomic.com, and that happens to be about transhumanism. So, long story short, that's how I found you two online, was through your comic. And could you just tell us a little bit about that, Perdition?
The comic book is inspired by real life events that my husband had to deal with, and it also ties into like the Luciferian agenda, in addition to the way transhumanism is going to change the world as we know it, and the possibilities that will arise from that, pretty much.
Okay. And now that is certainly a mouthful. So let's, for the audience, let's just, could you explain what the transhuman agenda is and how it relates to Luciferianism, what your experiences with that are, how the two are connected?
Well, the way I look at it is, it seems like from a lot of the research I've done on transhumanism, it seems to be like, making the human machine better, right? But there's also an element where they seem to be mixing a lot of animal DNA with human DNA. And I've always had this theory that animals seem to be able to either see or interact with the spirit realm in a different way than humans can. I've always suspected that animals can see into the infrared, because like when we're dealing with hauntings and stuff, it always seems that animals can see things that humans don't even know is in the room, like they can see something moving, they're following it with their eyes, and the humans are oblivious. And so I started thinking, if there's blending animal DNA with human DNA, then what is that going to do to us spiritually? That's going to enable humans to have what we would think of as superpowers, but the more you think about it, the more dangerous and frightening that prospect becomes. Because, so we as humans, our senses are kind of dampened when it comes to the spirit world,
Sure.
Like we can't really interact with it in a direct manner the way I suspect animals do, in a sense. So just imagine, say, if you had a human being who, was like part canine, and he could interface directly with, say, a demon or other entities without having to, steady transcendental meditation to, alter his consciousness after hours of concentration. He could just, have a direct conversation with this entity that appears, So that kind of opens up another can of worms, because I think a lot of people think of transhumanism as being like half machine, half man. But for me, I think it has a lot to do with becoming something else that's not human that is also organic. So, you know, the whole man animal thing.
Sure.
Uh, and if you don't mind, I'll kind of include some additional factors. It can be looked at from a secular standpoint or a religious standpoint. Our concerns are actually both secular and religious, but primarily because I'm a demonologist and a minister, I tend to focus on the spiritual aspect of it. But where it's dangerous in a secular way, well, a large amount of the scientific community, who believe in evolution, for instance, think that this is a natural evolutionary jump in the human species. But what happens to people who are just regular humans that aren't genetically modified? They become, subpar. They become a lower class individual. They become hunted. There's so many different scary scenarios that can come from that. And in addition, they have no idea what they're doing tampering with the genome. I mean,
Yeah.
the kinds of creatures that have, massive amounts of strength, much higher level intelligence. Who knows what, those things may sound like a positive change, but what other aspects of, say, animal DNA that would be mixed in with a human could cause that human to behavior to become non-human, to become less moral, for instance, or non-moral at all. I mean, the animal kingdom is a survival of the fittest kind of a environment. So those kind of forms of thinking and behaving would most likely also come into the genetics. But then on a spiritual side of it, one of the things that you have to look at is going back through the thousands of years. The oligarchies that have tried to control things have always been trying to find a way to synthesize with higher powers, to make a much more effective form of communication with what they believe are the archons, for instance. That's a word that they tend to use. If you go into looking into any kinds of enlightenment organizations like the Illuminati and things of that nature, they'll talk about the archons. In prior interviews that we have on our website, we'll talk briefly about Robert Monroe from the Monroe Institute, who basically pioneered out-of-body research and described entities that basically were in the firmament around the planet that were called archons, that farmed what they called loosh, which was a form of energy that humans and other creatures give off when they feel certain types of feelings like suffering. But the point of it that I'm trying to get at is that these different enlightened organizations have for thousands of years been trying to develop a way to be able to interface with the non-human powers that they believe are around the planet. And what better way to do that than to boost make yourself into human plus and have the ability to interact much more directly without needing a Ouija board or, as
Mind
Rebecca
altering
mentioned,
drugs.
mind-altering drugs, psychedelics, transcendental meditation, to be able to actually just interface naturally.
Yeah. Well, I will put a point in here that I find very interesting. This whole conversation to a lot of people sounds way out there, but when you're talking about transhumanism and the creation of artificial intelligence and things like that, I have to say that a lot of the people, the proponents of creating like sophisticated AI and becoming transhuman, a lot of the proponents, the serious people, get onto this subject matter into this sort of transcendental, the other realms of existence, into real metaphysics, and they do talk about it quite seriously. And to a lot of people who want to, like average people, I'd say, who want to promote transhumanism, they're more of an atheistic persuasion, I say. But I have found that there is this line of thinking that is prevalent among the people who are at the top of this.
Very true. It pervades a large amount of them. Even a lot of the geneticists and biologists who claim to be atheists, you find them kind of falling back on religious religious terms when they describe this. They talk about becoming godlike, becoming, being able to commune with other dimensions. All those words, as said a few seconds ago, definitely are all part of an illuminist agenda. And from my background, especially in demonology, one of the things that's always interesting to note, and I'm not saying this as a way to accuse everybody who's atheist, but a large amount of Luciferian and satanic doctrine leads back to being atheist.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that the people who ascribe to that philosophy focus on, which is, if nothing else, maybe not saying that God doesn't exist, but saying, basically refuting anything that God has anything to do with our existence.
Yes.
So,
very interesting. And to bring it back to Perdition, the comic, I'd like to ask how that does relate to your own life story, Roman, because you said that it did.
well, when I was a law enforcement officer back in the late '90s into all the way up until 2006, near 2003, I was investigating a case that seemed at first to just be related to what was child abuse. It ended up leading to an organization that is a private intelligence organization that is funded by government funds, that provides illegal services to high-ranking government officials of all different countries. I mean, for just a regular run-of-the-mill law enforcement officer, this was a very massive case to all of a sudden find myself in the middle of. I don't really necessarily believe that there are anything such thing as coincidences per se, but this was one heck of a coincidence to fall in the middle of this. As I was following the trail, the case got larger and larger, and it turned out that this particular organization is strictly Luciferian in its philosophy and foundation, and every member of it is Luciferian, and it's worldwide. And one of the primary side areas that this organization gets funding from is the areas of the government, such as DARPA, that are funding transhumanist genetic projects. So in the course of investigating this organization did find out that I was investigating, and they did basically through various means take my life apart piece by piece. One of the things that tends to happen when a military or private organization decides to stop someone who is finding out too much information, such as a whistleblower or a outside investigative agency, is they will do things to try to discredit that person rather than necessarily try to kill them, because that could actually cause a secondary investigation, which could then cause more attention to be placed on the investigation that other person was doing before they died. They'll actually do things to try to attack that person's credibility. And aspects that are going into this comic book that Rebecca's creating are going to kind of cover areas of that, such as gang stalking and bright lighting, and obviously those two areas. If you look up anything about that on the internet, there's a lot of information about that. It goes into subjects such as hearing voices. Some people believe that is something that is a technology, and actually the government has developed the technology to be able to beam voices into a person's head, but it's only line of sight. But back to the main point is, in the course of doing the investigation, I experienced so many different aspects of the way these people do business and the way these people deal with individuals that are endangering their agenda. And so a lot of that is going to be what's going into the comic.
My goodness, yeah. So you came upon a world that you had no idea was there previously.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct.
How did you make it to where you are now, and now that living your life now, how do you make it out, so to say?
Well, near the end, I was having windows shot out of my car with sniper rifles. I was poisoned. I was gang stalked solidly for over a year. And in addition to that, the supernatural aspects of it as well that were coming into play, because these people are dedicated, hardcore Luciferians. So what they were sending after me wasn't just people. I had to leave where I was living and move quite a long distance away, up into the wilderness, and stay gone for an extended period of time. And then when I came back in the general region, I did not go back to where I was originally living. And I completely started a new career and a new line of work, in addition to starting up our organization, which assists people who are dealing with these kind of problems.
Yes, and how? What do you do to help people out?
Well, it really depends upon the circumstances. Both of Rebecca and my backgrounds are uniquely qualified to deal with these things, or at least to advise people or help people move through situations like this. I mean, she has an extensive familiarity with occult backgrounds, and we both are, of course, Christians, and but that's her background is in art and the occult, and my background, aside from law enforcement, is in the ministry and in demonology. So depending upon what a person is going through, if a person is going through some form of gang stalking, I usually will give them as much advice as I can, and then refer them to their local law enforcement, which may or may not be helpful, but it's really the best that you can do. Because ordinarily when gang stalking is happening, the only bad thing that can happen to you is actually what you do to yourself by overreacting to it. But the other thing, we get a lot of people who contact us with paranormal issues. A lot of them are actually ghost hunters who have gotten an unfriendly attachment to them after they've gone into places that may not have been the best place to go to. So we help remove that influence from their lives. And then some are people who have gotten interested in things like using Ouija boards, divination, getting EVPs, trying to talk to ghosts, or maybe obsessing too much about that field, watching too many ghost and demon shows and thinking about it and all that, and then gotten an attachment. So sometimes the cases are simple enough that we can actually just talk the people through it over the phone and give them the reading material and the advice they need to take care of it on their own. And other times we actually have to make a house call and come and assist them in person.
Sure. Well, where the mind goes, the body follows, and it could very well be, and it seems that it is, that where the mind goes, the spirit follows. Do you think so?
Definitely. Yeah, that's for sure. Because it's like your attention is, most people think, well, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want that. It's like, well, did you focus on that? Was your attention directed at that subject? And that's what you want, and that's why it came into your life, whether they're willing to admit that or not. It's like a microscope or something.
The law of attraction. If you want to say
in a way.
The secret.
So what do you find people are looking for when they end up getting themselves in trouble, or before then?
Well, it seems like a lot of people get in trouble because they're just curious, and they don't understand that ghost hunting is necromancy. And then, that the curiosity, a lot of people start using Ouija boards because there's a loved one who died. That's usually, or because they're depressed and they're lonely, and they want to divine the future, and they want a better outcome. And then that leads to other things.
Mm-hmm. And that, in addition to that, it's curiosity in a lot of these areas of study and research will draw attention. I mean, curiosity in the area of the Luciferian agenda and Illuminism and even transhumanism can, it's under certain circumstances, raise the attention of certain people and/or entities that will then maybe start focusing attention on that person. I mean, during the course of my investigation, I found that there were specific websites that are actively monitored by these organizations, and people that show up at those websites that they don't recognize as a member of their organization will immediately be flagged, and they will start to watch those people because they want to know what brought you there. Was it an accident or was it something more? Nothing that side does is ever coincidental or accidental. They always are very deliberate in what they're doing. So they are very serious about the transhumanist agenda. They have a lot more behind that than people understand or realize. This isn't just a natural progression of science, or scientific inquiry. They have a very specific agenda behind it. And once again, I can go into the secularist way of looking at it or the spiritualist way of looking at it, but it actually has both secular and spiritual consequences and directives.
Okay, well, if you were to say overall what the agenda regarding transhumanism is, what would you say that is?
I'd say it's a vehicle to bring supernatural entities that were removed from their bodies in one form or another over multiple thousands of years back into our direct physical realm and allow them to start to guide the destiny of this planet once again. That is at least the Illuminist focus.
They need more gateways open to allow more of their influence to come in, basically. Unlock the key that opens the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Because go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, could like the creation of an AI, is that like a potential gateway for a discarnate intelligence to incarnate within?
It can be.
I think it's definitely an element in the dehumanization of our species. I think it will definitely be an element in us losing the uniqueness of our souls, in a sense.
Well, we have to, and obviously this is a very, going into this particular subject it's very metaphysical in nature and also philosophical to look at it like what makes a person something self-aware.
Yes.
Is there a spirit there, or is it just evolution and we just happen to be the moment you come out, you're self-aware, you die, you go nowhere. But if we are in fact self-aware beings and we have to have something that fills our bodies to make us an actual person, and not just us but animals too, anything that's alive, and looking at AI, who's to say what would happen the moment AI becomes self-aware? Ordinarily, for something to be self-aware, there has to be something there that's capable of being aware of itself. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a circular way of looking at it, but that we have to look at what it means to be self-aware, and something that is
to be alive.
Something that is alive is literally aware of its own existence, and possibly, obviously, also aware of its own mortality. Until a computer gets to that place, it's just a machine. But the moment it's aware of itself, what makes it now a person is, at least looking at it from a metaphysical standpoint, what makes it a person is that there's a person inside of there. Everything that the outside part of us is just a vehicle, according to most ways of looking at it metaphysically. Even whether you look at it from the Bible, or from, other forms of spiritual doctrine, usually, the body is something that your spirit or soul resides within. But, in transhumanism, you could say, take your mind out and put it into a machine, and then you are that machine. Or, you can alter your DNA and become something else. And, obviously there's all the weird implications of things like the Frankenstein type storyline, where if you cut off a person's, take his brain out and stick it into another body, is that still a person? Well, a lot of those things may not have been tried, or if they've been tried, we haven't been told about them. But there certainly is something to be said for what it is that makes someone or something self-aware, and why they would be focusing on doing that. Why not focus on curing cancer, like putting all of our money into things like that, instead of, say, giving us the abilities of certain animals, and possibly even moving into an area of cyborg research, which a lot of times these various organizations are looking at. It seems to me like they're focusing on moving in a direction that makes us less human than making us more human.
Yes, I agree. What is the reasons for going forward with all this? That's always the question to ask. And even from a deterministic point of view, okay, so a machine becomes self-aware, it has intelligence, and they would therefore say that out of the intelligence comes the spirit, and that's what spirit is. It's a symptom of the material workings of that. But there really is a transcendent quality to that, because there's always the mystery, and you can never deny that. It's always going to be there.
Well, in a sense, if you push it farther, it's almost like they're trying to create a new breed of soul, in a sense.
And
like a new kind of spirit.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. And going back, I mean, looking in terms of a biblically historical worldview, from our standpoint on it, specifically, and other people such as Tom Horn from Raiders Newsnetwork.com, who's written books such as Apollyon Rising 2012, and Forbidden Gateways. We look at it in terms of where are these spirits going to come from to inhabit these new bodies? Are they our spirits or someone else's? And at least according to what the Bible talks about, the world being populated with a hybrid species, which it referred to as Nephilim, that were all killed during the flood. And if spirits and souls don't perish when a person dies, in terms of them being just linked to the physical life of the body they happen to be in, but if they continue onward, and this is something that the Illuminists also believe too, and these are the people that are funding this research into H plus, into transhumanism. So remember, always got to keep in mind that the higher ups actually believe these things. So it was figured at being at least 1 billion people, 1 billion hybrids that perished in the flood, possibly more. And the thing of it is because they weren't fully human, that they were only half human, they had no place to go. And so they are loose, roaming around. Some people call them demons. And they, of course, from paranormal researchers, demonologists all agree that these demons want just one thing. They want a body. They want to be back in a body very badly. And at least looking at it from a scientific standpoint, well then, make a body that doesn't naturally have a soul, and therefore then that body has the ability to be inhabited by something. And that could be an area where transhumanist research leads to, is creating soulless bodies that can be inhabited by something.
Okay. Now, on the subject of the Luciferian ideology specifically, what is it in your experience? What is Luciferianism? Even what is Lucifer in your point of view?
Well, Lucifer was the name of the angelic being that was in charge of this area of the universe before the rebellion took place. And once again, I'm stating this from our viewpoint, and we have a biblical worldview because we're Christians. And according to the Bible and the Book of Enoch and other books like that, and not just those, but also a lot of other religious texts from other worldviews, that tell stories of a very similar nature, and a lot of these civilizations are, were so far apart as to not be able to communicate with each other, and they all seem to kind of have the same general story, that there was an entity that was extremely beautiful and powerful, that had control over this area, was actually originally put in that place by the Almighty, by God, and that entity, known as Lucifer, which means light bringer, decided that he should be in God's place. So he rounded up a large portion of the area of the universe on his side. Some measure it at approximately at least a third, and tried to take over heaven. And a war ensued, and he was thrown out. And there are, in addition to that, legends from the Sumerians, for instance, that talk about some kind of punishment from God or the gods, that because of a rebellion that ended up causing this planet, which was named something different at the time, to be smashed into by another planet, and it put it into darkness. We've got all kinds of interesting things in our solar system that can be looked at. Everybody has different theories. Different astronomers think that the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter just happens to be there because it's there, but some people believe that it may have been the original location, possibly even of this planet, before it was struck by something. But that all is conjecture, of course, because we weren't there and we have no way of knowing.
Yeah.
But regardless, then, going back to the biblical narrative, then at that point, Lucifer and this whole area of the universe was in darkness until God decided to remake the earth and create Adam and Eve. Now, from what I've just stated, that then would indicate to any of your listeners who know that I don't necessarily ascribe to the idea that the whole universe is 6,000 years old.
Sure.
From the Bible itself, there's very strong indications that that is not the case. The Bible's indicating that the earth was remade and Adam and Eve were made 6,000 years ago. However, just to kind of go into the Bible briefly, since we're on this subject, there is, when you look at Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, you've got Genesis 1:1 that says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." It doesn't give any specific time frame. It could be billions of years ago. And then the next scripture says, "And the earth was without form and void." Now, the interesting thing to note there is there are some translations, especially in the Hebrew, that actually say, "But the earth was without form and void." And without form and void actually means, the Hebrew is tohu and bohu, which means in vain and destroyed. So that's interesting to start with. But if you go into Isaiah, and I believe it's chapter 45, I'd have to double check, but there's actually a specific scripture, and anybody who wants to look it up in Isaiah, just look up in Isaiah the word "in vain," and you'll find the scripture where God actually says, "I did not form the earth in tohu." In other words, I did not form the earth in vain. So the point is, he says, when I created the earth, it was perfect, and I did not form it in vain. So to say then that when earth was first created 6,000 years ago, it was without form and void, that's not the case. And that's actually not even what the Bible's telling us. The Bible's telling us that God did create the earth perfect at first, but something happened in between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 that made the earth be destroyed and without form and void. And to find that, then you can go into Isaiah and also in Jeremiah, and you can find the scriptures where God specifically talks about Lucifer's rebellion. It says, "Oh, Lucifer, son of the dawn, how you, how you said that I will be like the Most High, I will ascend up to the heights, but you have been brought low." There's specific scriptures that talk about the judgment against Lucifer for his rebellion. So, sorry to go into that little side tangent.
That's fine.
The important part is just showing, biblical proof as to what may have happened to cause Lucifer to be who he is now. And when you look in the book of Enoch, it describes, even though it is considered an extra biblical text and is not considered inspired, though there have been times in the past where Enoch was part of the biblical canon, at least in certain Catholic Bibles. The book of Enoch describes some of the angels that had sided with Lucifer, who were sent down here to impart knowledge of various types to mankind, especially after Adam and Eve were made, and a lot of that knowledge was not it was the art of war, the art of making jewelry, the art of magic, a lot of these different things that God actually condemns in the Bible. But some of the other things that they also were sent to come down and teach man was the art of mixing animals and mixing beasts. And that's interesting when it goes back to transhumanism.
Sure.
People can look at that from a primitive standpoint, but when you really go back in time, just because 2,000, 3,000 years ago we didn't have nuclear reactors, it doesn't mean that man was primitive. And there's actually, no indication that they were any less intelligent than we are now. A lot of times when you go back and look at the actual language that each book was written in, say ancient Hebrew or ancient Greek, those words that they're using, for instance, mixing of beasts together, that actually is a very solid. It's translated in a solid way as to indicate mixing the genetic material of creatures together. The transhumanist agenda goes very far back, and it's always been essentially part of the Luciferian plan. And where we see that clearly in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 6, where it says that the sons of God, the Beni Ha Elohim, which means the sons of God, it does not mean humans as some people think it does. It actually is only ever referenced to spirit beings from heaven, looked down and saw women and decided to take them as wives. And ended up having children, and those children ended up becoming the Nephilim. And I'm not quoting that part verbatim. It says the Nephilim were in the earth that time and thereafter. But the point is that there was an agenda, and that agenda was instituted by Lucifer to stop a plan that God had. The first prophecy in the Bible, God told Lucifer that the seed of the woman would bruise him in the head, which means a death blow, and that he would bruise the seed in the heel, which is harming but not long term, and then the seed of the woman would bruise him in the head. And seed is the genetic line, and what was immediately after that happened was the fallen angels came down and started tainting our genome. And of course, then the flood had to come. Now, why did the flood happen? Well, because that said the world was filled full of evil, and that was all that man wanted to do. But we got to also look as why was Noah and his family spared? The scriptures specifically state that it's because he was perfect in his generations. Well, the translation of the Hebrew actually refers to being perfect in a genetic way. So it was actually implying then that Noah's family was one of the only families that hadn't had their genome tainted. And of course, later on, after the flood, the fallen ones continued to try to taint the genome. And the whole point is that originally they were trying to stop the coming of the Messiah by tainting the genome that would lead to him, because God later specifically stated which bloodline and which family that would come from. So they were trying to either kill it off or taint it. Now that isn't going to happen, because that's it's already taken place, and Jesus Christ came. And now the next agenda is to actually convince the whole planet that it's a good idea to change our genome and move forward to become H+, so that we can readily interact with them. And that is the Luciferian agenda, is total control through a feigned idea of light or enlightenment. You want to become the master of your environment, but in the end, you end up becoming a slave, because then your whole genome is a slave to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and the idea is to use intelligence, human intelligence, to, make a better world. Kind of the humanist view, even, is that, we're intelligent, so through intelligence, that's the only way to, perfect the world, for lack of a better term.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Now, you say that you've had a lot of contact with Luciferian individuals in your life. What has that been like? What is the Luciferian MO in your experience, if there is one?
Oh, are you talking to Roman or Rebecca?
Anyone who, either one of you.
Well, I mean, from my experience with people who are naturally aligned that way, it just seems that they just derive pleasure from causing misery. And that just seems to be, it's the same thing over and over and over again. Of course, I don't associate with people like that anymore because I'm a different person now that I've become a Christian recently. So, yeah, it's kind of a relief not to have to be around that kind of element anymore. But it was always the same. It all just seemed to focus around pain and misery and creating slaves.
And they, the people who are part of those organizations are constantly living in fear. It is a very dog eat dog environment. Each one is always trying to one up the other to try to please their masters. It's always interesting because you'll find a lot of their public entities, public corporations. A lot of them are marketing and consulting firms. If you look them up, you'll find consulting firms that never tell you what they consult for. But a lot of what they'll talk about is talking about personal mastery. But the funny thing about it is they're run by people that they all consider to be their masters. So they're teaching you to have personal mastery over your own life, but then you have a master, which is them. Yeah. And of course they have a master. So it's always a master and slave kind of environment. So they all are always in fear. The ones that I was directly investigating had chaotic lives that on the surface were very polished, but underneath the surface they were abusing drugs. They were leading very reckless lives because it's not a healthy environment. The entities that they commune with have nothing but destruction as their primary focus. But the interesting fact of it is that all of these different people, whether from the lowest to the highest, were getting perks from their masters based upon how much loosh they were able to generate. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, talking about the archons and harvesting something they call loosh. And people can look up some information about that if they want on the internet by looking. They can go to our website, and we have a section briefly discussing it. But they can also just look up the loosh rote, and loosh is spelled Loosh, and then rote is Rote. And it was what Robert Monroe was able to find out when he interviewed these archon entities that were up in the firmament. But basically, these various Luciferians, whatever position they happen to be in, they are to use their position to inflict as much pain and suffering on people as possible, because when people feel pain and suffering, they generate this loosh, which is what I like to refer to as the unholy spirit. It is what these entities use for power. Especially in the case of the fallen angels, who, when they rebelled, they were cut off from, communion with God, and therefore no longer had access to the Holy Spirit. They need something else to be able to give them their abilities to do things, and so they utilize this energy that humans and animals exude, and it is something they get rewarded for. If they can generate more pain and more suffering, presidents of countries, Congress people, not just of our countries, but, kings and presidents of other countries, the ones that are initiated into the Luciferian philosophy and into these organizations, which are primary Illuminist organizations, they all realize and understand that this is what they are to do. And they get rewarded for the amount of pain and suffering they inflict. Because their entire philosophy is based on that, their whole organization is all about backstabbing and one-upsmanship. And so no one is ever safe, and no one is ever truly happy. And that's also why there's so much drug abuse in their organizations also.
Are there a lot of sociopaths in such organizations? It sounds like sociopaths.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
an understatement.
I guess I should have asked, are they only sociopaths, or are there
Yeah.
some non-sociopaths?
A few of the people I dealt with, I thought, in the early parts, I was very idealistic about it, and I tried to pull a couple of them out of that situation because a couple of them turned out to be working in the same building I was in, and they are so afraid for what will happen to them that even the ones that may have a sliver of conscience left will not leave. Because what could happen to them is extreme. I mean, apart from people can you look at the human aspect. What would a human do to you if you left, like say the mafia or something like that? But it's not just that. I mean, the demonic entities and fallen angels can do horrific things to people if they choose. I personally have been thrown across rooms, scratched, slapped, punched, large pieces of furniture hurled at me, but that isn't only what they can do. They can reach inside your chest and hold your heart and stop it from beating or crush it. They can spontaneously combust people. Mm-hmm. It gets pretty spectacular in that sense. I'm pretty crazy in what they can do, and it sounds like a movie, but these are what these entities are capable of. So it's not just humans that they have to worry about.
Sure.
But it's a horrible existence that those people live in. But they, for one reason or another, chose it for themselves. They always, in that realm, you always have to give permission. And it becomes the same thing even when people have demonic problems that come into their lives. They're one form or another, the human and the spiritual, Luciferian, always ends up needing permission to enter in, and so that they have some form of right to be there.
So they have a claim over you.
Yeah, it's essentially a spiritual law is that they need permission. But a lot of times the way they gain permission is very sneaky. It isn't always just asking, "Hi, can I come in?"
Yeah.
It can be as simple as just taking an item that it belongs to them and bringing it into your house, and then they're part of it. But and as a side note, I just wanted to briefly mention, you can easily see their agenda in the movies and especially the music industry.
Sure.
The videos that are out there are getting more and more blatantly Luciferian every day. You look at Jay-Z, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, Rihanna, all of those videos.
They make Marilyn Manson look boring.
Yeah, it's very. And in the movies too, their message is becoming more and more strong as we're moving forward, and they're seeing their agenda come to fruition. A good website to look at in regards to that is vigilancecitizen.com. He goes into great detail analyzing the music videos, especially.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I agree with that. With the entertainment aspect, they certainly are Luciferian, in my opinion too. And on a personal note, I'd like to ask you what you think of the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, because that's something that I myself have experienced in the past. I was wondering what you may have thought about the phenomenon.
If you wouldn't mind my asking, what aspect of sleep paralysis are you dealing with? What do you feel when you wake up?
Well, it's been many years since I've even experienced it, but a few years ago, it would be I would have times where I'd be asleep, and sort of sudden panic, and it felt like at times I would be even wrestling with something on the bed, and it felt like I fell out of the bed, but at the same time, like I kind of had a foot in the bed. I didn't actually fall out of the bed. It felt
Like
like,
you were out of your body?
yeah, exactly. It felt like that. It felt like I fell out of bed. Felt like I was wrestling with something. And then, it's a struggle to wake up. You're trying as hard as you can to wake up. You can't. But then eventually you do. Your heart's racing a mile a minute. And then you're like, oh, man, what was that? you know?
Well, I think that there's a spiritual way of looking at it and a psychological way of looking at it. The problem I sometimes have with the psychological way of looking at things is I think that those are people's way of trying to explain away something that they don't necessarily fully understand.
Yeah.
I don't really think that the psychology that we presently have today can fully explain why that happens. The whole idea of, okay, you're starting to wake up, but your body hasn't fully woken up yet. But that then causes you to feel a malevolent presence in your room and feel like something is holding you down.
Yeah.
And makes you actually literally feel
like your life is over.
Terror of the terror of danger, like a serial killer is standing next to you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily totally buy that. I think that, I'm sure that there are some conditions that can cause that to take place that are explainable, in physiology and brain chemistry. But in addition to that, having experienced that same kind of situation, especially when I was in the throes of that whole investigation, and that was happening an awful lot. In addition to other supernatural things, I tend to attribute at least what I was dealing with to the supernatural, and I felt like literally I was being, pulled out of my bed, held down, felt some very heavy vibrational thing like pressing against me.
Yeah.
So I think it really depends. I mean, there are schools of thought that would say that some people who think that they're schizophrenic aren't actually schizophrenic, that they are just much more sensitive to the spiritual realm, and they're hearing things that are actually literally talking to them. And then on the flip side, there are people whose own brains are somehow have issues, and they're hearing voices that aren't really there.
I think sometimes sleep paralysis occurs when it's almost like your spirit body is returning from something. And so sleep paralysis doesn't always have to be like a spiritual assault, but a lot of times it seems to be something else.
Yeah, I mean, if humans are actually capable to a certain degree of leaving their bodies, and there are quite a few, institutes, set up to research that, and some of them have actually come up with some pretty compelling evidence in that area. And one of those institutes was the Monroe Institute. Then that could be definitely another explanation that you are, at that moment of time, though you are unconscious, your consciousness is partially left your body, and you're perceiving that other realm, and there's something that's following you back that is not very friendly. And so that certainly could be a possible situation you're experiencing.
Yeah. Well, my personal opinion is that it probably is a little bit of both. The psychological aspect, in that it's the dark side of yourself kind of popping up at a time like altered state of consciousness, sleep. But there's also the, what's going on in that realm, whether it be the mindscape, pure mindscape, or, what is a dream, what is all that, and it's real important to observe such phenomena. I feel it just gets, all this stuff gets just tossed out the window. Oh, it's just crazy. It's all just from your head. And that's really what we're encouraged to believe.
Absolutely. Well, and they end up, associating that with everything else. I mean, the subject matter we've talked about tonight, us being concerned about transhumanism, us being concerned about, say, the New World Order, things of that nature. I mean, if you went 10 years back everybody who talked about the New World Order was labeled a nut job. But then when 2008 happened and the financial markets collapsed, for the next year, every other word out of everybody's mouth from Bernanke to Obama to Bush to you name it, where everybody was saying New World Order, New World Order, a new world currency, all that. So the point is just a lot of times the powers that be and the media that backs them up tries to tell us that we're not all experiencing what we're experiencing, and that everything is all in our heads and everything that we're reading is just fiction. But there are too many people that have experienced these things, and too many credible sources that are backing it up for it not to be something worth people's attention and extra focus on.
Yeah, I agree, and the main point is that the proverbial they, are trying to get us to question ourselves, in that we have an experience and we have to throw it away just because someone said so, and that's never the right thing to do. We always have to learn from our own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, because when you doubt yourself, you're weaker and you're more susceptible.
Yeah.
Well, and if it's always, if you always believe that it's all in your head, you're going to be controlled. Then they can tell you other things you're picking up are all in your head, and it just spirals down from there. This shot they want to give you is for your own good. It's just it's going to make you a better person now. Go ahead and take this shot.
You're like, why wouldn't you want to be better than you are now?
Yeah. So
it's smarter, faster.
I agree. Well, it is quite a mysterious and strange world we live in, no doubt. So, with that, I guess, Rebecca and Roman, I just want to really thank you for coming on the show. So thank you for being here.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and I want to ask you where listeners can find your material, what you'd like listeners to find. Just let us know.
Sure. For more information about pretty much everything we've discussed tonight, feel free to go to sisintel.com. That's sisintel.com, or spectralintelligencesolutions.com. Either one of those will take you to the same website. And then for Rebecca's comic book that she's working on, it is Perdition.
It's perditioncomic.com.
That is correct. And her comic is, she's such an excellent artist, and she's
it's free. There's free downloads, free songs.
Yes, and I saw the comic. The artwork is excellent, and I really enjoyed the music. I did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the Spectral Intelligence website not only has articles about all the different things we've spoken about, but it also has quite a few hours of interviews we've done on other shows also, which can give everybody a really good resource to look into these subjects, and also to see if there are anything that they need to be concerned about in their own lives, and how to address those situations.
Okay. Well, once again, that was Rebecca and Roman of spectralintelligencesolutions.com, aka sisintel.com. So that is our show for tonight. I'm your host, Aaron Franz. This is Transresistor Radio. And as always, I want to say, Seeker, seek on.